if you haven't got that thing to risk, like, you might as well go and bashing people up on a weekend and have a laugh with your mates and get on it, because, you know, what's going to happen? You go down, right, you get 6 months. Well, what else are you going to be doing for 6 months? You know, and it gives you a little bit of status, and it gives you a little bit of, like, belonging. So you might as well. What else are you going to do?
It's early July and I'm meeting my mate for breakfast.
What do you want us to call you in this?
Jack Lewis. That sounds good.
So let's call him Jack. We're in a quiet, leafy London suburb, about to tuck into a big plate of ham and potato hash with fried eggs, chased with mugs of volcanic decaf. I wanted to talk about something I've been circling for a decade.
Why don't you tell us where we are and what it is you think that we're going to talk about today?
We're in East London and we are going to talk about football violence.
I met Jack 10 years ago when I first started as a writer. He was a few years older than me and still is, funnily enough. He wrote about music, menswear, a little about history, and also the fact that he was a football hooligan. He was just like, yeah, that's me. That's what I do with my mates on a Saturday. And I don't know if I ever told Jack this, but when we first met, he made a massive impression on me. He was like a lot of people I knew growing up, but he was erudite in this very specific non-dickhead sort of way. Articulate in a way I felt I wasn't. And yet, he still sounded like me. And he wasn't shy about who he was or what he was about.
I'll chat to you about it, whatever you want, chat to you about it all day. I love talking about it, but I just have to be careful because of work, because it is quite a misunderstood thing. It's not something that I want to attach my name to. It's so far outside of people's frame of reference that they just automatically assume the worst. And I can chat to you about it, and I'll chat to my mates about it, and even there's people within the creative industries who I know are from a similar background or have had some sort of exposure to it, where you don't have to tiptoe around it. They know it's like lots of young men get up to stuff when they're younger. It doesn't mean that you are a hardened criminal for the rest of your life.
He wanted you to know how much fun it all was, and if you weren't part of it, unlucky. Maybe you'll never really understand it. I guess that curiosity gap was what had me hooked. I grew up like Jack grew up, near where Jack grew up, and I'd never been part of it, never thrown a punch at a match, never stood in a car park with a bunch of blokes and had a row. And hearing him talk about his experience of football culture, it didn't make me want to go out and have a fight or buy a Stone Island jacket. I mean, that part it did, but I couldn't afford one anyway. But what his stories represented was a culture around the match that felt far more real and relatable to me than what happened on pitches inside these increasingly sanitized domes that felt more like gargantuan TV studios than a football stadium. I felt a little something click for me, something unlock, something I hadn't thought about in a long time, and I haven't been able to forget about it since.
When I got nicked, it didn't really matter that much to me, and also it's a bit of a badge of honour as well if you're in that situation, because you know it's proof that you are legit and you're not just a hanger-on.
My name is Sam Diss and I'm a writer about football, but only tangentially. I've never been interested in transfers or match reports. Instead, I've travelled the world telling stories about the game and the people who inhabit it. But really, I've been searching for something. For a decade, I've been using football as an excuse to understand what it means to feel something so true in your bones that nothing else matters. A feeling so all-encompassing that it has to be about so much more than sport itself. I've always wanted to find out why people go out of their way to find something that gives them meaning. What is it they're running from? What is it they're running toward? It's what first brought me to this story, to Jack, to breakfast, in that little cafe in that leafy East London suburb. I wanted to know what brought people to football violence and what happened when we were told they all went away.
All we're going for is a good game of football, a good punch up and a good piss up.
And this is all West Ham walking past.
They're going to have a crack at the pub.
Look, they're going to do the pub now.
There was a time when football hooliganism was everywhere.
Well, unfortunately, as I'm sure you've seen, it wasn't the football at Stamford Bridge which featured on the sports pages today. It was the scenes before, during and after involving hooligans.
Until recently, football grounds did not resemble maximum security prisons, with rival sets of supporters caged behind bars and segregated from one another by sterile areas.
For decades, it dominated the headlines, uniting the front page and the back, merging the two things England loves most, football and fear. The terraces were once a stage for something larger, a battleground not just for your club, but for identity, for belonging. And the fight didn't end when the mobs broke up, when police and CCTV moved in, or when capitalism hosed down the people's game. And as football and the world around it evolved, something deeper and darker lingered behind it. This sprawling subculture that has sent tens of thousands of men into the streets to fight for a feeling they could find nowhere else, that changed the way we see football and the way football sees and sells itself. And then one day it was gone. But hooliganism's legacy is not as dead as they'd have you believe. This series isn't about old headlines or lads looking for a scrap. It's about class, politics, and the identities people cling to when everything else feels like it's slipping away. I'm Sam Diss, and from Stak, this is Season 2 of Legacy, The English Disease. A story that both is and is not about football. This is about the ghosts of our past, the cracks in our present, and the myths we keep telling ourselves about the future. Episode 1, kicking off. By exploring English hooliganism and the subculture around it, its origins, its impact, I wanted to know what this working class subculture dominated by outsiders, the alienated, the isolated, the angry, could tell us about our current society, however awkward or uncomfortable the answers might be.
The term hooligan has never been a helpful term. It's never had a definition. It's never had a legal definition. It's never had an agreed social definition.
That's Jeff Pearson.
I'm a professor of law at the University of Manchester, and I've been carrying out research, mainly qualitative, on football fan behaviour, football violence, and football policing since the mid-1990s.
For 30 years, Jeff's been studying football fans, working with authorities to better understand how and why things like football violence happen. And for Jeff, maybe part of the reason the hooligan has disappeared from view is because it was never a useful term in the first place. What even is a hooligan?
It's been applied in a blanket term by the media and by politicians to everything from organised football fights between gangs around to somebody being drunk in a football stadium and falling asleep in the seat or running on the pitch to celebrate a goal. And when you've got such a wide blanket term that doesn't actually mean anything, very difficult to work out where the boundaries are. And the same act.
But definitions and boundaries aside, the truth is the numbers are plain. Football-related disorder, as authorities and academics often call it, has been going down for a long time.
There's no doubt that from the sort of early 1990s, we started to have a drop-off of reported incidents of violence and disorder, particularly in and around stadiums. The days of it being all pervasive in terms of what fans would talk about and what the media would report on are gone. So that's been the biggest change, really. There's been less media interest in football violence, less reporting of football violence, and by all measures which we have, in this country at least, we can see that instances of football violence have reduced very dramatically.
But as any football fan will know, what happens at the match is only part of the story. And that's why I wanted to talk over eggs and potatoes and coffee to Jack.
People sort of assume that casual culture, football violence culture sort of finished around the noughties when the internet came around. But that's not really the case. They just adapted and continued in a different way. Definitely it wasn't as like mainstream as it was in the 80s, 90s, but it was still about. It just sort of went underground a little bit. I would say after the turn of the millennium, the sort of mobs reduced to a lot smaller. So I think when people think about football violence and hooliganism, I think people think of like big marauding mobs of like 80, 100 people, all just sort of clashing in the middle of the street. But actually, from my experience, it was a lot more like, 8 to 10 people in a little car park or just not down a side street. And I think because that's not so visible, people would assume it had gone away. And also a lot of it was away from the stadiums because the police were so like hot on wrapping up like funds. They would know where people were. They would like give them an escort so they couldn't get into any trouble. And the police invested a lot of money in doing that to try and stamp it out. So people ended up having to not drink in the pubs near the grounds or like meet up in somewhere a mile away. Meet up in a park in a mile from the ground or something like that. So people didn't see that. The public going to football weren't even aware that it was happening. And most people, if you just see a load of blokes in a pub in a car park having a row, you wouldn't necessarily associate it with football if the ground is 2 miles down the road.
It was no coincidence that Jeff spoke about a decrease in violent incidents in the last 30 years. Since the advent of the Premier League in 1992, a venture designed to clean up English football and launder its image by creating the most visible and valuable league the world had ever seen, many fans had felt pushed out of its story. And I'm one of them. That was until this search to find out what happened to one of English culture's most divisive phenomena dragged me back into the fold. It's the first game of the 2024-25 Premier League season, West Ham Villa, and it's fucking hot. So I'm hiding in the shade of this great gazebo type thing out the back of the Carpenter's Arms, nursing a serviceable pint of San Miguel in a plastic glass, outside maybe the last proper pub left near West Ham Stadium, about a mile or so from the ground.
What makes a West Ham pub a West Ham pub? Apart from the big badges.
Loads of West Ham shirts in it. It comes down to, I don't know, it's this weird thing to kind of like song sales. I think it's this weird thing that's like really hard to put your finger on. It's like one of those things you kind of know it when you know it. It's like that. Do you ever hear that? Oh, she's always hiding.
I'm here with my producers Finn and Nikki. It's sunny, it's rammed, and the energy is way up. The optimism of a new year ahead of us. Just a few hours away from watching Villa squash us 2-1. The match was my first at the London Stadium in a few years, and my overall feeling was one of embarrassment. Not at the loss, I'm well versed in West Ham losing games, but because I used to see going to West Ham as a way to return to my roots. I used to live near the old ground, about 10-15 minutes away by train, but I didn't go that much as a kid. My dad's a cabbie, so he'd work a lot on Saturdays, or else be with his mates, who all supported different clubs, at the pub, a place he politely referred to as the beer shop. We'd go to a few games together, but when you're a kid, you don't really have a concept of what's going on. It's just like pure sensory material. I remember walking down Green Street towards the bowling ground, or Upton Park, depending on who you ask, to West Ham's old stadium. But my memories of those games are blurry, gauzy, liquid and overwhelming, where too much stimulus leaves your head swimming and asleep on your dad's shoulder on the trip home. When I got older and left the East End and moved to the suburbs, returning to West Ham on my own with my mates from school, I really saw it as an opportunity to reconnect a part of myself that I felt had been slightly lost in the move from the city to the far, far end of the district line.
Now, the reason for the death of the football hooligans, some people say, was either the rise of the ecstasy tablet and of rave culture, or perhaps that they, the thugs, simply got bored.
You're wrong there, mate. We're not dead, we were just resting. I mean, what did you think? We'd be peeled up and dancing like cunts in muddy fields for the rest of our lives. It's in man's nature to fight.
The Football Factory had come out just a few months before I got my first season ticket, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't influence us. A small budget film about Chelsea hooligans starring Danny Dyer. It had a swagger, a way of dressing, of speaking that we couldn't get enough of.
What else you gonna do on a Saturday? Sit in your fucking armchair wanking off to pop idols, then try and avoid your wife's gaze as you struggle to come to terms with your sexless marriage, then go and spunk your wages on kebabs, fruit machines and brasses? Fuck that for a laugh. I know what I'd rather do. Tottenham away. Love it.
Who's coming out for a drink? Didn't know Johnson and you're some nutty skunk.
And that damn petrol goes at 2 o'clock in the morning. What are you driving for?
Even if we didn't fully understand its profane patter or its undertones of nihilist bravado, we knew it made football, this thing we were allowed to go to alone, feel illicit and naughty and like fun. And it was like that, in a way. The energy you felt around the ground, peeking on tiptoes into the windows of flat-roof pubs, getting vicariously drunk from the leery, lagery crowd, it was a rush. But when I turned 16 and the prices went up, inevitably I had to stop going every week. I didn't have a job and my parents were less inclined to pay the 300% increase on my new season ticket. And after that, I don't know. I didn't go back often. Never more than like half a dozen times a season. Money and work and relationships and whatever, all different things get in the way. But West Ham, it still felt like a place I knew I could always return to if I needed. If I needed to reconnect, it wasn't going anywhere. And then it did. Before West Ham moved to their new stadium, which was made for the 2012 Olympics and definitely without football in mind, I went to the very last game at Upton Park with my dad, May 2017. That was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had at football or otherwise. But it's funny because we all knew it felt like the end of an era. It almost had this last days of Rome quality to it. Everything was super heightened, almost hysterical. People were like ripping chairs off the stands as mementos, and people were throwing bottles at the Man United buses that came in. And it was like this weird energy that was in the air. It was aggy and angry and weirdly joyous and celebratory in this strange ceremonial sort of way. Like all these people knew that everything was going to completely change after it. At first I kind of wrote that off as a bunch of middle-aged men who don't like time marching on without them, but I don't know, that day it felt like stepping into this little time warp. Like this little hole in history that I'd just been zapped back to like 1991 or whatever, just for a couple of hours.
It's important that we get that ball back as soon as we can.
Oh yes! That's a screamer!
Let's go and win it. All the very best, boys.
Premier League, live, only on Sky. It's a whole new ballgame.
Back when the Premier League was introduced in '92, it promised fans a whole new ballgame.
A whole new ballgame for Monday Night Football.
I was born just a year before, so it's been with me my whole life. It was a different beast to the old First Division that it replaced.
Mondays are changing. No longer that start of the week depression. We're into a whole new ball game on Sky Sports. Mondays are now officially part of the weekend. That means a few smiles, some family fun. These are the Sky Strikers about which you've heard so much. Some more formal introductions a little later in the programme. It also means some top-class Premier League football. In short, Monday Night Football.
Football had changed little in the century before that. Games kicked off at 3 p.m. on a Saturday, so factory workers could finish by 1 and still make it to the stadium back in the days of 6-day work weeks. It was all real and raw and never trying to be something it wasn't. Terraces were packed with bodies, the energy palpable, but stadiums were falling apart and people stopped going. By the mid-80s, snooker had overtaken football as the most popular sport in the country. And then came the tragedies. The fire at Bradford in 1985, Hillsborough in 1989. Nothing to do with football violence, but events that changed everything. The authorities decided English football needed to clean up its act. Out went the terraces, and in came these all-seater stadiums. There were necessary changes, but cynics saw it as an open goal for decision-makers to repackage the sport and sell it back to fans at greatly increased markup. In 1992, with a little help from Sky and Rupert Murdoch, the Premier League was born. Gone were the piss-stained terraces and the smell of fried onions, replaced by fireworks, TV cameras and a shiny new offering. football as a consumer packaged product. And Murdoch's media empire, which had once vilified the working class and football fans, now had its hands on the golden goose. It's only been going one way ever since. A few months after that final match at West Ham's Old Upton Park, I went to watch the first game at their new stadium and immediately just felt this massive sense of loss. I realised that it really wasn't ever going to be the same. And that just laid football bare for me in a way that I found very uncomfortable to look at. It made me realise that I was essentially paying loads of money to watch a not very good football team lose, rather than it being like this really special thing in my life, which it had been previously. And so, going back this summer, we're a better football team now than we were at that time. But it's all still just so representative of a sense of loss of identity for me. I told Jack about it.
I think it's just something about being human. We need the comfort of having a sort of a tribe, for want of a better word. We need the comfort of having that. Some people need that more than others. I think some people, if you grow up in a fairly comfortable situation where you feel very safe and part of something, then maybe you don't need to go out there in the world and find it in your own way. But if you don't, especially with a lot of the social problems with working class communities, it means a lot of people grow up without that feeling of safety. And you have to then go out and find it for yourself in the world. And then the quickest way to do that is by getting a group of mates and going out and being violent and being feared and respected, because then people don't mess with you.
I never wanted to be feared, or maybe I did. I grew up in a council estate, and I was lucky that I did grow up in a family that made me feel safe and secure. But I was still scrawny and lonely and frustrated. Maybe I liked the credibility, the authority that being part of a crowd gave me. And I knew West Ham's reputation. Its hooligans, the intercity firm, the ICF, were one of the most renowned in the country. But I never wanted to fight. I just wanted to be seen. But seen as part of something, to be somehow at once seen and not seen at all. But on my long, winding journey into this story, I found a writer who seemed to understand and be able to articulate what I was feeling.
Hello, I am Bill Buford. I am a writer and an editor and a cook, evidently.
Bill was some writer as well, before giving it up to become a chef in France. But before that, when he was relaunching the languishing literary magazine Granter, and just before he became the fiction editor of The New Yorker, which is already some CV, he wrote a book that would become a cornerstone of hooligan culture. It was called Among the Thugs. About a year or so ago, I started seeing Bill's book all over social media. Its stark black and white cover of a skinhead with a black eye smoking a fag, popping up on Instagram stories of solo cafe trips, long train rides to the home counties, and jaunts to Mykonos. How did this book about the dark lore of man's attraction to violence and the sensual madness of crowds become the Instagram beach read of last summer? I DM'd him a mission statement laying out my plan. I'd had a few beers in me, I think, and I was feeling quite bold. Being a football fan from a working class background, I wrote, I've long been fascinated by casual culture and its sensationalised mutations in hooliganism. And I've been fascinated by the way it became a moral panic in British culture, twisted into a convenient distraction by unscrupulous tabloids and government. In my opinion, the football fan angle is more timely than ever. Dismissed as a small minority of idiots and gladly hidden from view by society, football fan subcultures that once ran the length of the political spectrum have been blatantly co-opted by right-wing extremism and are now emerging once more from Britain's fissures, radicalised, ostracised and determined to be heard. And I hope to hear from you about a potential interview for the show. I was laying it on thick because it was a bit of a hit and hope, in truth. But to my surprise, he replied, Dear Sam, you're clearly a wonderful lunatic. Happy to talk, Bill.
I wrote the book accidentally. I wrote the book because I, like anyone else following sports and the news at that time, recognized that every week there were large crowds of English males destroying town squares, trains, and each other in a way that appeared to be routine. And I happened to get a train on a sleepy little stop in Wales somewhere, which had been taken over by Liverpool supporters. And I saw this crowd just going berserk firsthand. They were stopping for police reinforcements. And I thought, it is really...
And Bill just couldn't understand why people weren't paying more attention and why, when they were, people weren't asking more questions.
This is not normal behavior. It really is not normal behavior for all across the country for thousands of people to convene on a Saturday and start beating each other up.
Reading Bill's book again, a book he spent a decade writing, undercover with football fans from Man United to England's national team, following them to games home and away across the 80s, becoming seriously swept up in it all. It was the spark that ignited this story for me. It was a book written by an outsider about notoriously cagey insiders that became respected and even loved by the people it portrayed.
Did it feel like a subject that was weirdly taboo or untouchable, it seemed, for a lot of people?
Two things. One, it really was taboo because nobody wanted to look too deeply into it because they wanted to dismiss all the participants in the crowd violence as being lobotomized morons who should all be gathered up together and exterminated. There was another thing which I discovered, though, too, which is that most of the people writing about football, most journalists, and most people I would approach to write had educated, posh accents. If they went in with this group, they would be pretty conspicuous.
But for Bill, his breezy American accent definitely acted as a way in.
Do you feel like it kind of like brought people's guard down a little bit?
I think that's a great point because they really did want to explain it. And it was like they were describing, I don't know, some pop music or a sound or a fashion or politics. It was, I remember listening to these guys over a couple pints and they weren't defending violence and they weren't trying to justify it. They were like describing its finer features. And I thought, you guys are mad.
But Jack wasn't mad. The man who had inspired me as a young writer, who wrote colour pieces about having a row in a car park off Seven Sisters Road on a Saturday before the match, between his pieces on the music of Larry Levan and how to style Clark's Wallabies. Why did Jack think young men were like this?
If you're a young man from a working class background in Britain, you ain't got a lot else going on in your life, probably, right? You ain't necessarily got... If you've got a job, then it might not be one that you're excited about, or you've got like big career prospects, or, if you ain't got a job, then you're sitting around doing fuck all week. You ain't really got much optimism about life, a lot of hope. So this little bit of recreational disorder and violence is your bit of excitement in life, and that's really what it boils down to. It's like, this is how you have fun. And it also... it gives you a bit of status, gives you a bit of meaning to your life, and that I think the reason that people, especially in the media, really struggle to understand the mentality of it, because they've never been in a position where they've got no chances and no hope.
What Jack is talking about here is class structures. That's the world Bill, the unsuspecting American, had found himself punched in the face by. Growing up, I knew those dynamics instinctively. But to help me articulate it now, I went to speak to one of British academia's most prized agitators on the subject, Lisa Mackenzie.
I have got a doctor, so I am Dr. Lisa Mackenzie.
Sorry, Dr. Lisa Mackenzie.
It's still difficult to say that. So the very nature of being working class for me is about struggle and violence.
She describes herself online as a working class academic and an anarchist author, and her work has, for decades, help shift the way British academia talks about class.
So I'm an academic, a sociologist. I do research mostly on class inequality in Britain. And obviously that spans everything, because if there's one thing about the British system is it's completely structured on class. It is always the elephant in the room. And it's also always the elephant that, people will bend over backwards and do Twister rather than acknowledge it. So, I'm constantly unpopular because, I make them see it.
And so, for Lisa, violence at football, or even near football, is class-based violence. But, unpopular as ever, not everyone agrees with her. Like Jeff Pearson, professor of law, studier of fans, who we heard from earlier.
There's no evidence that suggests or proves that when you have periods of austerity and people are less well off, that there is going to be an increase in football violence.
For him, in short, the data doesn't lie.
We've had periods of economic boom and bust, and they do not relate to when there are spikes in disorder. Why didn't we get spikes in football disorder reported in the 1930s, for example? Why did that not happen? Why, when we talk about the sort of boom of the 1960s, are we seeing an increase in football violence? I don't think we can point to economic factors causing those problems.
But class is never just about money. It's tangled with boredom, rigid structures, and narratives that trap people, making it hard to separate the economic from the political.
Being working class is always about your life is pretty mundane. It used to be you start work at this time, you left at work at that time, and then you had some free time in other spaces. And what you did with that free time had to be so much more interesting than what you were doing at work. Violence has always been a way of sort of relieving stress or frustration or anger at something or somebody. Particularly men, particularly lads, wanting to protect something, wanting to own something, wanting to be responsible for something, wanting to feel important. Voids happen and nature fills a void. So I think props hooliganism, especially in the sort of 70s and 80s, I think it wasn't apolitical at all. It was extremely political. So it wasn't just sort of some lads going out on a Saturday afternoon and having a fight. It was it's highly political. If it wasn't so political, the establishment wouldn't have cared about it.
That's your frame of reference and that's your whole world, then naturally that's the way you're going to view politics, everything. But I think as well, because it's a subculture where there is a lot of anger and a lot of, the reason that it is violent is because there's a lot of anger in the people involved in it are angry people. I think it lends itself quite well to angry politics. So it's not a surprise if you are, but that's not the whole story, of course not. There's still, I know loads of people who have got complete opposite politics, but they don't, I don't know. I would say they're in the minority now. And I also think it's a cultural thing now, maybe, more so, that if you are that politically that way inclined, that's where you see your people. So that's where you gravitate towards. That's where you belong. It's where you feel like you can air those views and you have like-minded people who think the same thing as you. So that's what you start doing. I think it's just quite a natural thing for that to have happened.
Stuck between the data and the feeling, the reporting and the lived experience, I was uncomfortable. All this talk, it was so at odds with what we'd been told, what I'd been told, about what violence was and what it meant, who it was for. It made me wince. We were brought up to know that violence was never the answer. But what if this violence wasn't trying to be an answer to anything at all? What if this violence was just a ricochet, an echo of something else? It can't have meant nothing. We were obliged as polite, mindful society to see violence as beyond understanding, beyond comprehension, really. Mindless, senseless, chaotic. But what did it really mean? Could we sit with it and examine it? Could I? If I was to see violence as a physical articulation of something, could I sit and listen to what it was trying to say? I asked Bill what he could make of it.
Men are just weird. They're just fucked. There's something that happens between the ages of 16 and 22 when the male species is really dangerous. And they're driven by stuff that is so much in our genes and is sort of imperatives of our chromosome and goes back so long and so deep as society has always had difficulty with men of that age and has come up in societies that are developed with ways of accommodating them and getting them out of the way, whether it's the military or the church or school or apprenticeships or guilds. There is something about men at that age, which is wild.
I couldn't help but think back to the start, over breakfast with Jack, where he told me he'd tell me all about it, about violence, about kicking off, but he never really did. What he told me instead was how the energy around this thing brought people together, in friendship or in a fight. It was stark to me that football violence could be a twisted, organising principle around which people could make sense of their lives. I'd felt that too. That desperate search for meaning, haven't we all? I needed to find others, people I didn't already know. People who were there then, in the thick of it, the good old, bad old days, and the people who are involved now, wherever they are, in whatever this thing has become. I needed to hear how its impacts pushed people towards the fringes of society, their politics warped, their frustrations and identities manipulated and weaponized. I needed to know how their stories made me feel, and I needed to know if I could make any sense of this thing. And then Lisa caught me off guard.
My ex-husband was a football hooligan. I had no problem with that at all. Why would I? All lads that I knew were into it. Why wouldn't you fancy a lad? Why wouldn't you want to go out with a lad who's, a top lad? Now, this is going to sound terrible and probably controversial to anyone else, but I understand why young people, or not just young people, why men do that, working class men do it. It's a working class thing, I'm all right with it. Did you expect me to say that?
On the next episode of The English Disease.
It's one of our communications, how we communicate through violence. Anyone takes a piss out of you, you fucking smack him. You got an argument with a geezer outside. That's how we are born, that's how we are bred. What the fuck was going to happen to us? We look at middle class guys, they're born in with richness and wealth and money and mixing, they turn out that way. But we're not. We're born in different fires. We answer to a different fucking God. And that God has got a broken nose and a fucking black eye.
The English Disease is a Stak production. It was written and hosted by me, Sam Diss. Produced by Nicky Anderson and Finn Ranson. Sound designed by Tom Wally. And with original theme music by my mate, Connor Schofield. Executive production by Luke Moore, John Teague and Charlie Morgan.
Legacy is a Stak production and part of the Acast Creation Network.